Good morning and welcome to What's Up with Power. We are glad to have you guys here with us on Facebook Live, and we have a nice group ride going on here in Zwift. If you haven't joined that, I want to hop in and join us. We have a very special episode for you today. We have a guest presenter, a Training Peaks certified coach who runs Data Driven Athlete, and that is Mr. Nate Dunn. Welcome him here to the screen. Nate, how you doing?
Thank you, Justin. Doing well.
Yeah, so we are very happy to have Nate with us. He is I'd say a product of the sponsorship we've been doing with Training Peaks. Training Peaks has helped us make this connection. Training Peaks has been very nice to our viewership. They've even offered a discount code for viewers of the stream. If you decide you want to do Training Peaks Premium, using the code ODZ20 can get you 20% off of the Training Peaks Premium services. So if you, we do talk about some of their services. We talk about some of the other alternatives for those of you who may want to use a free service, but that is a great way to save on an awesome service. So Nate, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, how you got connected with Training Peaks, and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Justin, and the rest of the team ODZ for inviting me this morning. My name is Nate Dunn, and my coaching company is Data Driven Athlete, and I'm out of Sacramento, California. And I coach cyclists and other endurance athletes, and I'm a Training Peaks Level 2 certified coach. So they have a different certification kind of levels that they have, and been working with Training Peaks software for probably the last 8 to 10 years now or so. And really excited to be here this morning and present a little bit on developing a training plan for you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. Yeah, so we are 15 seconds until the group ride rolls here on Zwift. I will get that kicked off, and then we will toss the ball over to Nate, who's going to run the teaching section today. And then once we get to the questions and answers, I'll help moderate that. So the group ride is starting. Give us a couple seconds to just get the group formed here. For those of you in the game, we're rolling around 1.5 to 1.8 watts per kilo. So it's a real nice group ride pace. And without any further ado, we're going to pass it over to Nate, and I'm going to run the slides. So I'm going to click forward to your second slide right now.
Sure. So we on a quick review or?
Yes, a quick review is what's up on the screen.
Got it. Yeah. So thank you guys again for having me this morning. I know you've been talking a little bit about some of the basic metrics in Training Peaks, so we wanted to review those really briefly. Some of you are probably more familiar with these than others, but wanted to touch on them really briefly. So we're going to be talking a little bit today really briefly about the Performance Manager chart in Training Peaks. And the Performance Manager chart is comprised of 3 primary metrics: ATL, CTL, and TSB. And ATL, also known as acute training load, is simply an estimate of your fatigue that you're carrying as a cyclist. Then we have CTL, or chronic training load, which we consider to be your fitness. And then TSB, training stress balance freshness. So if you're a little bit overwhelmed by all this power jargon, you can Google some of these terms. Training and Racing with a Power Meter, of course, is another great resource that you guys have been working through to kind of jump into that. Wanted to touch that briefly before we jump in today. So next slide, please.
There you go.
So this is the graphical representation of those different metrics. So this is our Performance Manager chart. You can see TSB represented on the top in orange, CTL as a blue line, ATL as a pink line there. And really basically, this is a Performance Manager chart of an athlete. You can see here at the end of a season, they stopped riding. So their TSB is sky high, right? Their freshness is sky high. Their ATL is really, really low, so they don't have a lot of fatigue. And because of that, then their CTL, or their fitness, is dropping and it's plummeting. And then as we move through the season, you can see that ATL and TSB kind of switch places, right? So ATL jumps up, so fatigue is jumping up, and with fatigue comes fitness, right? So fatigue is driving that CTL increase as we progress through the year. And this is really just a snapshot of training stress as we progress through the year. So we're going to, again, come back to this again after we've talked about a few other concepts, but wanted to touch on it briefly. So next slide, please.
There you go.
So before we jump into any of the training jargon or watts or any of the kind of more advanced training concepts, this presentation is really going to be more conceptual in nature to give you some basic guidelines for developing your own training plan, no matter what phase or goal you might have. So before we jump into different topics like periodization or any of that type of stuff, you really need to answer this question, and that is, why train? And if you don't have a good answer, or maybe even a couple answers to this question, no matter how good your training plan is, it's not likely that you're going to be able to be successful with it. So we could jump to the next slide, please.
Got it.
So for me, these are the answers to this question. I want to be able to ride with my friends. I want to be able to experience different rides and to be fit enough to be able to ride with them. So that's my primary answer to this why train question. I also want to be competitive in races that I enter. And then I want to experience measurable progress. So if you wake up in the morning and you're not that excited about riding your bike, these are the answers to this why train question are going to be central to you being consistent throughout the year. So that's why we start with this. And again, before you even get into kind of the more advanced details of how to periodize a plan, or kind of this question of volume or high intensity, how you might design your workouts, or kind of tapering, this is the bedrock of any training plan, and it's being really firm and confident in answering this question. So next slide, please.
Got it.
So number 2, sign up. I've found in my experience that the number one driver of someone being consistent in a training plan is having a date or an event on the calendar. And this doesn't have to be a race. It doesn't have to be a formal event. It could be something as informal as, I want to meet my friends on this date and do this important ride. But whatever that is, I've found that if you can put an actual date on the calendar, it's going to make it much easier to kind of connect those dots between why am I training and I'm going to choose to be consistent and to follow through with this training plan when you have a piece of accountability on the calendar to help you kind of pushing forward. So next slide, please.
Got it.
So number 3, assess your time. When I work with athletes, one of the first conversations I have is I say, get out your calendar and let's move Monday through Sunday, and let's look at each day of the week and carve out how much time you have. There's been a new book that's come out based on some new research called the 1 Minute Workout. It's gotten a lot of popular press, but it's based on this concept of, even 10 minutes is plenty of time to do productive work on the trainer. And for those of you that are riding on Zwift, you already know this, that you can jump on the trainer 10 minutes, 20 minutes, you can get an effective workout in that time that can be productive and help you remain consistent and progressing towards your goals. So comb through your calendar, look how much time you've got each week, and at the same time, be conservative and be honest about what your other limitations are. To say, hey, you know what, today 10 minutes is all I've got. I've got all these other responsibilities, but 10 minutes I can do that. And if you can map out that time, that can serve as a great foundation for establishing a training plan to know what you've got to work with as you progress through the year. Next slide, please.
Got it.
So the final one is to ensure that you're applying progression in your training plan. And progressive overload really is the key towards continuing to get better, no matter what your objectives are in the sport. So this progressive element that you choose, whatever it is really going to be shaped by how much time you have, what your environment is, and kind of what your personal preference is when it comes to training. And to expand on that a little bit more, for a lot of you, right now it's still winter months, and the environment is really dictating how much riding you can do or the type of riding you can do. So trying to devise a progressive element or trying to come up with a progressive element of a lot of volume just isn't realistic for you. And so it's better to choose something else where you can experience progression. And we can go to the next slide. We can kind of talk about this. So here are some different options for having a progressive element in your training plan. So that might be power at threshold. So this is probably the most common one that people talk about. And maybe every couple weeks you're increasing the intensity or increasing your power output over a specific duration. Like let's say that's 10 minutes, 20 minutes or whatever. So it doesn't have to just be increasing your power at threshold. It could also be the duration of that threshold effort. So rather than increasing your watts, maybe you're working on increasing the duration that you're spending at a certain wattage. So maybe that's, you're moving from 10 minutes to 12 minutes to 14 minutes or so on. It could be, number of sprints. That could be a progressive element that you're working on throughout a training plan. So you can see the rest of these listed here, but really, no matter what phase of your training you're in, whether or not that's base training or whether or not that's a build, or whether or not that's preparing for a race, ensuring that you have a progressive element and that you are tracking that progressive element is a central part of designing a training plan. So if we could actually go back one more slide.
Got it.
So keeping these into account in terms of what your available training time is, what your environment is, and then also your personal preference, you can advance again to the slide. Those are the core components of saying whether or not it's base training, whether or not it's a build phase, that you are tracking something and you're applying more and more intensity or volume or number of sprints to your training plan to ensure that you're getting better. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So
okay,
this is probably difficult
on the
for
chart.
a lot of you to see.
Are you on the?
Yeah, so this is probably difficult for a lot of you guys to see, but you can probably get kind of get the impression. So this is simply a graphical representation of a volume progression. So if you're riding outside or if you have a lot of volume to play with, you can see this is a typical 3-week build and then one week rest cycle. So we're kind of going from 6 hours to 7 hours to 8 hours, and then we have a rest week. So this would be a progressive element of volume, and through that progression of volume, we're also seeing a concurrent increase in ride intensity as you're getting fitter. Okay, so next slide, please.
Got it.
So next slide, right, is assuming a fixed volume. So you're riding on the trainer a lot. It's over the winter time. You have a fixed amount of hours you can ride each week, and your volume is staying the same, but maybe what you're focusing on is increasing your intensity from week to week, and that is your primary progressive element. So next slide, please. So coming back to a little bit of what you learned about in the previous presentation. So this would be a progressive element of training stress. So the performance manager chart is a great way to demonstrate how you're progressing in your training stress as you move throughout the course of the year. So these three different examples here of a progressive element, either in increasing your volume, increasing your intensity, or keeping an eye on your overall training stress as you progress through the year, is kind of that fourth and final step in creating a training plan. So next slide, please.
Got it.
So this is actually getting a little bit into chapter 10 of training and racing with the power meter, but the kind of the final piece of this, right, is to track your progress. And this is another graph that might be difficult for you to see on the webcast, but this is simply showing the duration of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and 40 minutes normalized power. And it's showing this athlete throughout the course of a season and answering a very basic question, and that is this athlete getting better over these primary power durations? And you can kind of see these trends here, maybe even briefly in the webcast, and you can see, okay, yes, we can answer that question, that this athlete is getting better, they're progressing, and so the training plan that they've been following has been effective for them. So whatever that progressive element that you're choosing, you want to make sure that you're tracking it and you're measuring it, and you can answer that question with objectivity and say, this training plan has been effective and I've been getting better, I've been improving, or it hasn't and I need to make adjustments or changes to my training plan. So don't just choose something to follow, or don't just choose a progressive element. Make sure that you're tracking it and using data to be able to answer that question objectively in terms of whether or not you're getting better. So next slide, please.
Got it.
So in summary, again, start with this question, why train? Write down these reasons, make sure that you feel really firmly. And at the end of the day, maybe you say, I don't really need to train. I'd rather just ride my bike, and maybe training or maybe a more advanced look at a training plan, maybe that's not the best thing for me right now, and that's okay too. But if you're going to decide to create a training plan or follow one, you want to make sure that you can answer this question. So number 2, sign up for an event, do it now. go on your local, association, find some events that are in your area, some fondos, some races, sign up for them. Assess your time. Be honest, be realistic, and take a look exactly how much time you have to train, and then apply a progressive element using the principle of progressive overload in your training, and then prove it with data that you're actually getting better. So next slide.
Got it.
So we're going to move a little bit here into Q&A portion, and I know that what we talked about today was pretty basic in nature, and it was more conceptual in terms of giving you some basic ideas for creating a training plan. And if you have specific questions about how you might apply some of these principles to your training, now's a great time to ask that. I'm willing to jump into whatever. There's no special sauce or propriety information. You can, whatever questions you have, we can jump right into it. And yeah, so I'll pass it, I think, back over to
Perfect.
Justin.
Thank you so much, Nate. That's great presentation. And I just want to reiterate that this Q&A session is for you to ask Nate whatever question you want related to what he taught, training in general. So let the questions fly in on Discord chat, on Facebook chat. We're watching them both here. We will feed them through. I also want to point out a couple things. We've got Nate's contact email. I think it might be a little bit small, but it's nate@datadrivenathlete.com. So if you have any specific questions about him, his business, go ahead and contact him there. And also new, we have if you have any questions, if you're watching this offline, not on live broadcast, and something comes up that you want to get answered, we have an email address, WUWP@teamodz.com. So what's up with power at teamodz.com. You can send your questions there and we will feed those in. So that's for anyone who may be watching this not live. So here we go. Go ahead.
Hey, Nate, real quick, what is your sports background?
I'm sorry?
What is your sports background?
My sports background. Yeah, so I played sports throughout my life. Played.
I think you said work background.
My work background.
No, I said sports.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood the question. Sports.
Got it. Yeah,
Sorry.
no problem. So yeah, my background was in team sports throughout my life, and then as I began cycling later in life, getting more involved in cycling. I've been coaching now since 2010. So that's my cycling and coaching since 2010. Cycling since a little bit before that. So that's my my background in the sport. If that answers your question.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. We've got a question coming in from Facebook. It says, Nate, what are your thoughts on missed workouts and reorganizing a week on the fly? I try to train for triathlons, and I find life with 3 girls and a wife can get in the way of training.
Yeah, so I think to best answer that question in terms of missed workouts is really about what the overall volume or the overall available training time you have during the week. So if you have a lot of training time, which it sounds like you don't, but let's assume that you have a lot of training time, I think it's much more appropriate to, I guess you could say, quote, make up a workout and to say, hey, I missed that workout yesterday, and so we're going to shift that to today, and I can still get in kind of that planned workout. But in a case like yours, where you have a really limited amount of training time, I think generally it makes the most sense to not try and make up workouts and to shift to kind of focus on maybe 2 key workouts for the week. So you might say, you have a key workout on the weekend and you have 1 key workout during the week, and to say, okay, if I'm going to miss workouts during the week, I'm basically going to shift these workouts around to ensure that I'm still getting these core workouts no matter how much time I miss. So if I have scheduled 5 days on the calendar, and if I'm only going to be able to hit 2, then I can still hit these 2 core workouts. And that's generally the approach that I follow with athletes, is to kind of identify the most important workouts that we have for the week, one a weekend workout, one during the week. And no matter what happens, to kind of shift that workout to make sure that we're hitting that one, as opposed to, let's say, stacking workouts or saying, hey, I missed yesterday's workout, and so now I've got 2 workouts to do tomorrow. I don't think in general that's a good idea for someone who's has a limited amount of time to train.
Awesome answer. Thank you, Nate. All right, we have another one coming at you from Facebook. This time it's Brad Curtis. Says, do most people use trainers when they're living in an urban area and it's very difficult to get a 20-minute effort in without stoplights? What's your experience on that, Nate?
Yeah, so actually, in general, with athletes that are primarily riding on the trainer, I try and keep their sustained efforts to 10 minutes or less. And the main reason for this is that, and those of you guys that are riding on a trainer right now know that 20 minutes indoors on the trainer is miserable. So now I'd say, to answer that question, I'd say it depends. If an athlete has really, really lofty goals, really, really lofty competitive goals, and they're restricted by weather or restricted by living in an urban environment, then you may have to say, you know what, 20 minutes, you're going to have to do that. So you're going to have to, you're going to have to suck it up, and you're going to have to spend that time indoors on the trainer. But for most athletes, what I find is that I think it makes more sense to break up that effort, either by having short 15-second rest periods every minute if you're kind of trying to execute a longer workout, a longer interval, or to say in general we're going to keep our efforts to 8 to 10 minutes max when it comes to a longer sustained interval. So to get to that question again, I'd say it depends on what your goals are. But I think in general, if you're spending a lot of time on the trainer, it makes more sense to prioritize mental freshness and sustainable training over the course of an entire season than it does to try and hammer out really long intervals under generally miserable conditions of being indoors on the trainer. Now, I will say that Zwift has totally changed this game in terms of being able to ride for longer periods of time indoors on the trainer and for it to feel much more like being on the road. And I think that has changed really how much I advise athletes to spend on the trainer, because it's not so grueling. So I'd say take stock of where you're at in terms of how much time you can spend on the trainer, but err on the side of less sustained work, err on the side of mental freshness, kind of preserving mental freshness, as opposed to getting close to that edge of burnout because you're spending too much time doing the most challenging type work on the trainer, which is sustained work.
Great answer. Yeah, and I'd say I definitely agree with you that Zwift has changed the game there. I might be a little bit of a not perfect use case here, but like yesterday I did 3.5 hours on Zwift, and on Monday I did 3 hours. So yeah, Zwift definitely, and that included 3 20-minute long SST efforts. So Zwift has definitely changed the game there, but that may not be for everyone.
Yeah. So Justin, in your case, that's a part of the conversation, is to say, how much do you enjoy being on the trainer? Kind of try and flush that out in terms of, if you came to me and you said, hey, I enjoy riding for 3 hours on the trainer, my first response would be, you're crazy. My second response would be, let's work with that. If that's something that you enjoy and it works, then let's have at it. Let's go 20-minute efforts, whatever it takes. But, and what I've found, and maybe that's because I'm in California, but what I've found is that for most people, multiple 20-minute efforts is going to do more harm than good when it comes to their longevity throughout the course of the rest of the season, and still being enthusiastic about training once the weather gets better. Yeah.
Good point. And that is a valid point, that you don't want to burn out.
Yeah.
It's a good point. I think we might be having some dropped frames on the live broadcast, so don't worry, we have a full high quality recording we will get up on YouTube. But let's see, we got a couple more questions coming in here. I am doing the Zwift 8-week race prep workout. This comes from Luke Pedersen. It will end a week before a 30-mile fat bike race in the snow in northern Wisconsin. What would be a good thing to do the weekdays before the race? The race is on a Saturday.
So in general, I would say it depends on what the volume progression of that plan is leading up to that. So I don't know if I can ask a follow-up question to that, or if that's just coming through.
You'll be a minute delay.
Okay. So I would assume that the plan is probably taking into account kind of a brief taper as you're approaching your final event. But to give you some general guidelines about that taper period, which is what you're asking about, you want to maintain intensity of your effort while reducing the volume. So let's say if you've been executing, let's say maybe 8 hours of training leading up into your target event, then a very general basic guideline might be to reduce your volume to somewhere around 4 to 6 hours before that final event while maintaining the intensity of your previous training. So that gets into a larger discussion about kind of how to taper before events. And the best answer to that question, can be it depends in terms of what you've been doing in the past. But again, to give you a general kind of guideline, if you've been training a ton, then you'll want to taper more for that event. So if you're training at a very high training volume, then you'll want to taper more. If your training volume is low or moderate, you might not really need to taper your volume at all, and you might be actually best served going into that event, maybe just with a couple days of rest. So hopefully that gives you enough to kind of go forward, heading into that fat bike event.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd say if that didn't answer your question, Luke, I'd probably say you could probably contact Nate directly offline. So
yeah,
we've got.
If that doesn't answer your question, feel free to send me an email, nate@datadrivenathlete.com, and I'll be love to follow up with you further on that. So.
Great. Okay. Question coming in from Graham Denny says, "Hi Nate, how does a training plan work if you have multiple objectives that can stack up?"
Yeah, so I think for most athletes, they probably do have multiple objectives that they're maybe tracking or that they're looking at. I would say in general, maybe limit the number of objectives that you're targeting during a specific period. So, or I guess another way of saying that would be generally when you're moving through a training plan, your objectives are pretty comparable. So if you're moving through a base period, maybe that, some of those objectives are to improve your aerobic fitness. And how do you improve, how do you measure an improvement in aerobic fitness? Well, maybe that's a measurable increase in your power at threshold. And so maybe some of those objectives are pretty tightly clustered. So in one of the slides, I was demonstrating how to track your progress. And we were tracking 5-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute, and 40-minute normalized power. So those are roughly targets that are going to be contained in roughly the same kind of block or period of your training. So I would say, to answer your question, I would say try and keep your training objectives pretty singular or grouped together pretty tightly to where the training that you're doing is serving to achieve objectives that are matching your training, which should be pretty similar to what your training is. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. And again, if it didn't answer your question that well, feel free to follow up with me, via email or whatnot.
Okay, we've got at least two more here, and we've got about 3.5 minutes left. So Ian Curtis says, if you only have time for 2 workouts in a week, what should those concentrate on?
So it depends. So I'm going to assume that maybe you have 45 minutes for each of those workouts. And this gets to this question of kind of high intensity training. So if you only have 2 workouts to do, the simplest rule is that you're going to be riding really hard over the course of those 2 workouts. So assuming that you have 2 workouts to do, I think if I had an athlete with 2 days or 2 workouts, I'd probably have one of those workouts be sustained threshold type efforts. So if you're Justin and you can knock out 20-minute efforts, no problem, then I would probably, have a workout where you're, progressively increasing the amount of time you can spend at threshold. So maybe you go 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So again, this is assuming that that maybe you're a bit of a trainer drone and you have an unlimited amount of motivation to do those types of efforts. So I'd probably do one workout where I was progressively increasing the amount of time at threshold. And then for the other workout, I'd probably do high intensity sprint interval training. So I would, you can follow up with me again via email, or you can, look around online for different types of sprint workouts. But that's probably how I would spend my time. If all I had were 2 workouts, it would be one workout doing increasing the amount of time I was spending at threshold, and then I would be doing workouts that were focused on explosive, high intensity sprint type work. So it wouldn't be a lot of fun. There might not be a lot of joy in those workouts, but I think that would be your best bang for your buck in terms of getting better in a limited amount of time.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you, Nate. Next question will probably be our last one before we wrap up, from Carlos Valadares. Nate, what is a realistic projected FTP improvement on your 8-week, 8 hours per week base training 1 program, beginning with an FTP of 208?
So another it depends question. So, and you can understand how this would be. So, if you've been training a lot and your FTP is at 208, then you wouldn't expect, or you would expect a smaller improvement over the progression of 8 weeks. If you have just begun improving, or if you've just begun training, and your FTP is at 208 over 8 weeks, you could expect a significant improvement. So, I mean, to give you some hard numbers, I've seen people improve over the course of 8 weeks that just started training that can put as much as 40 watts on their FTP. So that, again, that's at the very high end of someone who hasn't been training a lot. They've just begun to introduce a lot of really focused training, and so they see really, really big results. If you've been training pretty consistently, or if you think you've been following a good training plan, then over the course of 8 weeks, an improvement of maybe 15 watts might be much more realistic. It might also be, an equally really significant improvement. So it depends on what your training status has been leading up into that. In terms of I think where your ceiling is in terms of what you could expect over the course of 8 weeks.
Awesome. I think that is spot on. That it matches definitely what I have experienced. So the time in the group pride is up. Nate, if you have any further questions for Nate, contact him at nate@datadrivenathlete.com. You can also just Google Data-Driven Athlete. You'll find him. If you have any questions that you wanted to get followed up, maybe weren't necessarily for Nate, you can contact us at WUWP@teamodz.com. We'll follow up with you there. And if you've liked the content here on the channel, remind you to hit like, follow us. We've got lots of good content coming, including later this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. Pacific or 6:30 Eastern. We have a ride called the Skills and Drills Ride, sponsored by Castelli, where we teach you the racing tactics. So Ian Murray leads that ride. It's an awesome event, led through Discord. He talks you through all sorts of different racing skills and drills and practices them. So go ahead and check that out. Smash that like button if you like the channel, and we appreciate so much having you on the channel here, Nate. Thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to getting more great content. All right, everyone, we are signing off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.